Well, hey there, everybody. Matt Heller here, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting and the author of The Myth of Employee Burnout, here with another episode of 3 Questions. This is where I get to ask 3 questions of a guest, they get to ask 3 questions of me, and we just see where the conversation goes. We have no idea what those questions are going to be when we start, so all of our answers are unrehearsed and unprepared. I am super excited to welcome Erik Beard as my guest today. Erik is an attorney who practices in Hartford, Connecticut, travels all over the place doing that. Also has an extensive background in the attractions industry, which I'll let him tell you about here in just a second. But Erik also runs a blog called The Legal Roller Coaster. That's legalrollercoaster.com, where he talks a lot about legal issues that affect the attractions industry. So, Erik, without further ado, if you wouldn't mind just saying hello and telling us a little bit more about kind of what you do and what you've been up to.
Well, hello. I don't know what more to add after you've just given that wonderful introduction, but yes, so I am a lawyer today, but 20 years ago or so when I first met Matt, I was not a lawyer. I was actually in the amusement park day-to-day operations business. I started out at Cedar Point, did a few years at Cedar Point, started out as a paddle wheel captain, running rides, and then worked my way up to supervision and ultimately into human resources. Then I moved to Worlds of Fun, was the manager of operations at Worlds of Fun in Kansas City, and then also spent some time at Universal Studios on the construction team for Islands of Adventure, writing manuals and operating budgets and all that kind of fun stuff. And then at some point decided that, I had another calling and had to get out of the day-to-day operation and pursue the career that I'm in now, which is a lawyer. But as many people I know in the industry, once you get bit by the bug, you don't really let it go. So even though I'm not in a park day-to-day anymore, I still do whatever I can to help out the industry on the legal side of things. And, that can entail representation in court. It can entail counseling on policies and procedures, ADA issues, safety issues, etc. And then, of course, there's the blog, which has been a little quiet lately, but that is being fixed, not currently as we speak, but very, very soon you will see some new material up on the blog.
Awesome. I love reading your perspectives from both an operator and a legal perspective on a lot of the issues that a lot of operators face in this industry. So glad to hear that that'll be coming back. So I've got a question for you if you're ready.
Let's do it. Bring it on.
Speaking of the blog, you like I said, you've written a lot of great articles on there, a lot of great perspectives for people, and I think you do it in a way that is not too lawyerly. Obviously, you have your lawyer hat, but I think you write it in a way that everybody can kind of understand and grasp, which I think is really, really, really welcoming. When you try to understand a lot of legal issues. But I want to go back a couple of years, and if you don't mind, talk a little bit about some of the posts that got probably the most attention and notoriety for you, and that was around Blackfish.
Blackfish, aren't you?
Yes. But I don't necessarily want to talk about the posts themselves, although those were extremely well written. And if anybody wants to check them out, I'm sure you can just search for, White Lies, Blackfish, that series.
Yes, Blackfish, White Lies.
Okay, thank you for the correction. But I really want to understand or ask you about your motivation for kind of getting involved, and what was it that got you to want to write those pieces, and what were some of the intended and maybe some unintended consequences of putting those pieces out there.
Yeah, so you are right. Those pieces that I wrote, and it was a 5-part series called Blackfish, White Lies, and those pieces really kind of, I think I was already on the map with respect to the industry. I think a lot of people in the industry already knew about the blog, but those pieces really opened up the blog to a whole new audience that had not, that may not have followed, ADA issues in ride operations or something like that. Something that I had written about in the past. Why did I get involved? Well, I got involved with that and chose to write about it because I watched the movie. One night I was just sitting at home and it was on CNN. Excuse me. And I watched the movie and it was very compelling. And I looked at my wife who was watching it with me and I said, holy cow, like, I wonder if all of that is true, then that's very disturbing because the slant, I'm sure you've seen it, Matt, but the slant is decidedly anti-SeaWorld. And it made me want to go read more, which I guess is a good thing. With any kind of piece of advocacy that is written or produced, you want the audience to go learn more about whatever topic you're writing about. So I did go read more, and I started reading up on the director. And the director is a woman named Gabriella Cowperthwaite. I have never met her, haven't had any interaction with her or anything, but I came across an article where she had said, kind of on the public record, that this was not a piece of advocacy, that this was just a piece of straight up journalism. And I really had a problem with that. As a person who is an advocate for a living and who knows how to paint a compelling story, because that's what I do. When I go into court and I'm arguing to a judge or I'm arguing to a jury, my job is to tell a story that is compelling for my client. And I think that's what she did in Blackfish. She told a story that was very compelling to a certain point of view, but the claim that it was not actually advocating for anything kind of got under my skin. And I thought, I'm not going to try to take on the science. I can't go head to head with biologists who have studied cetaceans for their entire lives. I'm not equipped to do that. But what I am equipped to do is to kind of pull back, the curtain a little bit and show kind of, here's how this movie was made in a way that made you automatically favor one side over the other. And that's really where the Blackfish White Lies series came from. It came from an effort to kind of debunk the claim that this was a complete narrative that aired on the side of being neutral and was not an advocacy piece. And it didn't take that long to discover a lot of things about those pieces, which are, about that movie, which are detailed in the pieces. And I really never expected it to do what it did. I quietly posted those, as I did with pretty much all my pieces. I post them on the internet. I put a link on LinkedIn or something, or tweet it out. But most of the time, they are warmly received by my core audience, which is not an enormous number of people. But it's but this one, I remember I had gone to a movie one night and I was sitting in the car waiting for my wife to come out of Kohl's. She had gone in to return a shirt or something. And somebody must have found the first installment of Blackfish White Lies and started tweeting it around. And suddenly my phone started going absolutely crazy with people messaging me and retweeting it and tagging me. And I really didn't know what was going on at first because I had never had a piece that hit quite as hard as that one did. And then I started getting emails and the comments started rolling in. And if you ever go on the blog, I mean, you can click on any given article and you might find one or two comments. There's not a lot there. But if you go to Blackfish White Lies, you're going to see pages of comments. You can scroll down. There's probably, 15 or 20 on each piece. Some of them have more, and they were becoming very heated. And that was really, if you want to think about, or you want to talk about the unintended consequence of those pieces, I probably underestimated the level of vitriol that would be out there for a viewpoint that was opposing that was espoused in Blackfish. I got a lot of very nasty email. I got a lot of very nasty comments. I had not ever deleted comments from my blog before that, but I did delete some there because they weren't constructive. I'm all for constructive conversation. If you have a different view from mine, I have no issue with that. But name calling or making threats or, that kind of thing. I don't think that has any place. So that was probably the unintended consequence. The other interesting thing that I discovered in writing those pieces was that how many people in the industry were not on SeaWorld's side. And that was something I did not expect, but I got a lot of comments, and I've had a lot of conversations when I'm at IAPA or at any one of the many industry events that I go to every year. People are not shy about pulling me aside and wanting to talk about it. And I will say that the people I've spoken to in the industry, I've never had a problem with them being kind of crazy or rude or hateful about it. But there are certainly a lot of people with opposing viewpoints out there, and I value the opportunity to kind of have a discussion with them about what I saw in the movie and what they have seen in the movie. But that was a surprise as well. That I think a lot of the general public feel that, well, if you're in the amusement industry, you must be behind SeaWorld, and that's not necessarily true. So there you go.
Okay. Thank you. And just a quick follow-up. So I know that you said that you hadn't gotten that many comments before, and you were getting all kinds of comments, and a lot of them were not constructive. So the ones that were sort of constructive, were they still on both sides of the issue and able to have a constructive conversation, or were they mostly agreeing with you?
No, they were on both sides. And in fact, there were some private conversations that were also from people who disagreed with me, who chose to reach out through email rather than post a public comment, including one or two of the people that were in the movie, which I was actually surprised to see that they had seen the pieces and that they wanted to discuss it. And the people who were in the movie, who I wrote an entire piece about some of them, a couple of them reached out, and the criticism was well taken, and it was level-headed. It was not of the hateful variety, which was nice to hear, because if anybody would have had a reason to be really upset with what I had written, I think it might have been somebody that I'd actually named. But it's interesting. I go on those pieces every now and then and just reread the comments, because there is a level of discussion there that is certainly missing as we record this on Super Tuesday in the
You're right.
election process. Is there a solution out there that we've been able to uncover because I wrote a few blog articles? No, there's not. But I do think that when people use their brains and actually think through an issue, even the people who are on one side or the other can have the capacity to understand the other side's view. And I think that's really important when you have a really touchy issue like the issue of captivity that doesn't have an easy answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with any discussion, whether it be political, religious, SeaWorld. If you're kind of have an open mind and you're able to use your mind to help understand the other person and not be so cut off and just say, well, this is my position and I'm never going to hear what you say because you disagree with me.
Yeah, and I think I tried to put myself in the position of a judge, and you'll see that in some of the pieces I wrote, where I likened Blackfish to being kind of a lead argument in the court of public opinion. And any good judge is never going to be on your side when you're arguing to them. They will always take the opposite side, and then when your opponent stands up, they will make all the arguments you made to that person because they want to test your argument. And so that's how I approached when I was dealing with the comments and I dealt with the emails in Blackfish. I found it much more effective and more satisfying, frankly, intellectually, to really kind of drill down into what the points that were being made were and where are the strengths and weaknesses in each of those arguments, and try to emphasize my own strengths in my arguments, but I also recognize a lot of the weaknesses. I don't run from the fact that I have a long history in the industry, and that that some people may consider that to give me a bias. I fully recognize that, and there's nothing I can do about that other than to just present the facts as I see them. And if you want to agree with them, great. And if you don't, you at least know where I got my views from.
Mm-hmm. And I remember reading those thinking that even though I knew you and I knew that you had this industry background, that you were still presenting it in a way that you weren't advocating for one side or the other. You're saying this is what they presented as fact, and here's what I found to be a fact as well.
Well,
so that
I'm
was
glad you got that.
I think the world. Yeah, awesome.
Mission accomplished. Check with that.
Yeah, there you go. Check. Very good.
Okay, my turn?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to start with an easy one for you. They will get progressively harder, I will warn you.
Okay.
So you will have to forgive me that until you contacted me about doing this, I was not overly familiar with this series of episodes that you have put together. So I went and like any good participant, I watched, I think 2 or 3 of them. So my question to you is, because you've got some really interesting people that you've talked to, what's something that you have learned or that has been talked about in the prior episodes that has really stuck with you since you've recorded those episodes? And, you know, and something that you have, you know, kind of carried with you as you've moved on, either recording new episodes or in the work that you're doing?
Oh, wow. I think, first of all, I've noticed a trend, if you will, in the episodes. And while they've been very different people from very different backgrounds, you know, including yourself, there's an underlying passion, I think, that people have for the industry and for what they do. And I think that, you know, goes right back to what you said about when you get bit by the amusement park bug, it's very hard to let that go. And in fact, we don't want to let it go. So I think that has been, you know, sort of something that I kind of thought would be there, but I didn't realize it would be there in the way that it is. And you'd be able to, at least for myself, as I watch them back, or as I, you know, even as I'm going through them, as I see that kind of play out in the things that people do. I think one of the things that Sean's episode kind of showed me and taught me, he got kind of personal on, not personal in a bad way, but, you know, he made the questions very personal. And obviously Sean and I have known each other for a while. You and I have known each other for a while. And I think that made for some more interesting conversations. So I've tried to, you know, as I think about questions in the future, tried to balance sort of, you know, getting to know the person a little bit more, or allowing the audience to get to know them a little bit more, along with some professional insight. Because I really started this for a couple of reasons. I don't know if you watched Amy Holloman's video, but she asked, what's something that I had, what's a fear that I'd overcome? And for me, it was talking to a computer like this and getting myself out there. But I knew as a speaker, as a trainer, as a consultant, that people wanted to hear what I had to say. But I always felt that I was more comfortable in a conversation situation. So that's kind of where I came up with this idea to do these videos. And don't feel bad that you haven't, you know, heard a lot about these. That's totally okay. It's not like your blog pieces that get tweeted out to everybody.
You know, it's not like they burn up the internet either, my friend.
Well, and so I think I've learned, or I took from that, you know, the more I do this, the more comfortable I'm going to get. And, you know, like with anything, you get better as you go along. So I'm always thinking about different ways to tweak even the lighting in here. I have terrible lighting in my home office, but I'm always experimenting with that, experimenting with, again, questions, and thinking about who I can get that would be a really interesting guest. And I've been very, very fortunate. I think that everybody so far has been very interesting and has been so gracious to share all the things that they've been willing to share with me, and consequently with you know, all 4 people that have been watching. So I think that's kind of my takeaway from
you know,
this process.
Well, I think, you know, the point about that you've always been better with a conversation is something that I have seen when I've seen you speak to people. One of the things I like about your presentations typically is that they are not a lecture. And when I go, and I try to emulate that to a certain degree, because when I speak on legal issues, the last thing people want is a law school class. Having attended a lot of them, I can tell you that they're not all that much fun. And so the idea of a conversation where it's you pose a question, you get people involved, you get them on their feet a little bit, you get them speaking to you and they actually help teach the course through their own contributions. I think that lends itself well to this web series that you're doing here, and I really do like it. And the other thing that jumped out at me in what you just said was how obvious it is, the passion for the industry that people are bringing to your conversations with them. And I got to say, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest, because there's something about it. And I think you and I have probably talked about this before, that, there's not a lot of industries out there that kind of engender the loyalty and the passion that of the people who work in them. And, one thing that is, and I hope you don't mind if I share this, but I happen to know that you take a roller coaster tour every single summer, and you put it all over Facebook, and you go to like 16 different parks in 7 days or something. So, and there are a lot of people in other industries. You don't see bankers who want to go on vacation to visit other banks. You don't see builders who want to go visit other construction sites necessarily. But I know a lot of people who work full-time in the amusement industry who can't wait to go see what Disney is building next, or what Universal is building next, or go visit the last, trolley park at the end, in some small town in Connecticut or something. And that's not only impressive, but I think it's important for the industry, because I think it keeps it really vibrant, and gives it some life that having, as somebody who works with a lot of people in a lot of different industries, I don't see it very often in other industries.
And that's what I've heard too. I mean, I've worked a little bit outside the attractions industry, but definitely heard that about the loyalty to the industry. Would you also say that it's pretty unique for our industry that we share as much as we do? I mean, not proprietary secrets and things, but when you go to IAAPA, or you go to WWA, or you go to Ames, or you go to Ride Camp, like we got to do a couple years ago, I mean, there's people are willing to share just about anything that they do. Is that kind of unique to us?
I think it is, because I think in a lot of other industries, there's a much larger concern for competitive information and what qualifies as competitive information. And those may be industries where safety is not such a concern. In a more of a commercial context, you don't see a lot of concern for safety. But for example, I do a lot of work in the aviation industry as well as the amusement industry. And that is actually an industry that is actually quite similar to the amusement industry in that way. I go to conferences every year, 2 or 3 a year, for the aviation industry, where there is a lot of sharing of best practices when it comes to safety, because just like the amusement industry, that is their number one, highest priority. They don't want to see anybody hurt or killed on an airplane. So, but it is a little bit rare that you see that level of sharing. And in fact, even within the industry, I've seen that really increase markedly in the last, 20 years or so that I've been involved, on kind of a high level. In fact, I was just at Ride Camp about 3 weeks ago out in Los Angeles. And for those who don't know what Ride Camp is, it's the International Ride Operator Certification course, with Patty Beasley and Cindy Huddy. And it's a great, great experience out there. And, one of the things, though, I said to the participants was, I remember a time when there wasn't this level of communication, even about safety. It was every park chain or every park kind of doing their own thing, and not a lot of sharing. There might be sharing within the system, but there wasn't a lot of sharing outside of it. And the fact that we seem to have, through IAAPA and through the regional associations, I mean, I'm on the board for NIAPA, we're very, very tight-knit, and we share a lot of safety information. We're not out sharing what our new capital expenditures are going to be, but we're sharing safety information, and that is so refreshing to see, because the safety record of the industry is so impressive, and that can only enhance that.
And really, I mean, I definitely see the similarity between aviation and attractions, because one fatality is, no matter who the airline is, it's bad for the entire industry.
Right.
And it's very similar to us too.
It's actually a point that I've made several times before, and the fact that one fatality in either industry results in a huge media blitz. And why? Because it doesn't happen very often. They're both incredibly safe industries, and therefore it's really big news when something bad does happen. And, you know, I think everybody in the industry, in both of those industries, really takes it their duty to make it safe very, very seriously.
Right. I would agree with that 100%. So, all right. So I've got another question for you.
Okay.
All right. So you've worked at Universal. Obviously, you worked with Cedar Fair, and you have a lot of other experiences, a lot of other places around the country. Now, excluding Universal and Disney, I want you to think about a park or an attraction that would make a good movie. What would that park or attraction be? And as a bonus, who would star in that movie?
An existing park or attraction, or one that I come up with in my own head?
Let's go existing.
Okay. All right. That's a heck of a question. That has no legal bent at all. I was not expecting that.
Good.
So, all right. Okay, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to craft a new rule for myself here, that it does not have to be an existing park. It can be one that did exist at some point. And I'm going to go with paddle wheel excursions at Cedar Point.
Okay.
It's my baby. It's where I started. And I spent 2 years as a paddle wheel captain, you know, telling the stupid jokes about the stuff on either side of the lagoon and driving our boats. And yes, Disney, we actually drove our boats. No tracks at Cedar Point. But to say that paddle wheel captains never really fancied themselves as low rent movie stars is probably a lie, because we definitely considered ourselves the celebrities of the park. We had more interaction with our guests than anybody else. That we had them basically held captive for 8 minutes as we drove them around the lagoon. And, you know, there was a little story as you went around. You know, first you met the father and his son fishing, and then you kind of went into the wilderness, and there was the elk and the cougar, and then the you know, Buck Skinner, the trader, and then the Canfields and the McGees shooting at each other. And if all of that doesn't set up right for a movie, I don't know what else would. Especially if I can't go to Disney World or Universal, who you know, builds attractions to be made into movies. So
exactly. They already have that relationship. So
and the other thing that would be that I like about that about paddle wheel excursions is that it was a ride. It was one of the only rides at Cedar Point that everybody could go on. You know, you could be in a stroller, or you could be 90 years old and in a wheelchair, and everybody could go, and everybody would have the same experience, and everybody would have a good time. So I think that would make a very fine family film. Now, who to star in it? That is a difficult question. So it would have to be somebody with a certain level of spot-on comedic timing in order to emulate the natural humor of the paddle wheel captains, and an everyman quality, I think. So, boy, I don't know. Maybe you know, it's so corny. The jokes on that ride were so corny. I think maybe Bob Saget, but only like the Full House version of Bob Saget, not the stand-up version of Bob Saget, which is a very different Bob Saget. But I could see Bob Saget, or maybe I don't know, like like Kevin James or something.
Okay. When you said everyman, I thought Tom Hanks.
Oh, I think Tom Hanks would be far overqualified to do that. maybe like Tom Hanks in his bosom buddies.
I was just going to say, yeah, bosom buddy days.
I fear that probably dated both of us right there.
I'm sure it did. Well, if that didn't, then your comment about us knowing each other for 20 years probably did.
That's right. I mean, it's amazing that we've known each other since we were 5.
Right. So. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. All right. I'm ready.
My turn? All right.
Betcha.
So I mentioned earlier that we are in the midst of campaign season, and that it is Super Tuesday today. And while I was waiting to start this, I was actually checking CNN.com and looking for election results and watching some news snippets of things that happened today. And I'm really fascinated by politics, even though I have absolutely no desire to ever be in politics. But I'm kind of wondering, and I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not asking you about policy here in the election. I'm not asking you if you're a Democrat or a Republican or anything like that. But you have, carved out a living for yourself talking about leadership. And that's what this whole election is at the end of the day really about, is about who's going to lead the country. And so as you kind of watch the zoo that has been going on, especially on the Republican side, although the Democrats are not immune from it, but I think it's safe to say that it's more colorful on the Republican side right now. What are you seeing that's good about what you're seeing and that gives you hope for quality leadership in the future? Because I think a lot of times people focus on what is not good. But as somebody who knows their stuff on this, what are you seeing that you like?
Interesting. I think what I'm seeing that might be good for the future is honestly not necessarily any of the candidates. But
thank you for your honesty.
Right? It's the conversations that are going on, and I don't mean the people that create little pictures to put up on Facebook about how this person's bad because they're not their candidate and the whole thing. But I think going back to what you said earlier, when you get level-headed conversation about what is possible, I think that's when you start to get people that are interested in making things better, and there's a hope for the future. I try to think about what each person would be like if they were in the White House. Each person that has gotten this far in the process, and whatever you want to say about previous commanders in chiefs, most of them had sort of an air about them, a sophistication about them that I think is important when you think about, we're going to look to that person to be our leader. And I don't know that I see a lot of that in a lot of the candidates, but I also, I don't see them instilling the trust that they need to in the people. And so that kind of gets back to why I think the hope is in the people who are having intelligent conversations about this. And by the way, if you're looking for an intelligent political conversation, please do not look at Facebook. That's not the place to look for that. But if people are talking to their neighbors or going out and things like that, again, kind of face to face, I think that's where you see more of that happening. But I think the more they're thinking about what could be what impacts their lives and what kind of leader they want to see in that position, and just the fact that there are more and more people, it seems like at least, that are encouraging others to vote whether or not they share the same political outlook. Just go exercise your right as an American and do what you should do. I don't care who you vote for, just do what you're supposed to do to be part of the process, because you can't complain if you don't vote. Did I say that right?
You did.
Yeah. So I think that's where I see the hope, and I can only hope, I guess, to use that word, that whoever does get in the office, that kind of like in the past, that the things that happen in the campaign are a means to an end. That's how they try to get themselves into that position. But that at the core of each one of them, and obviously I don't know any of them personally, but at the core of each one of them, there's got to be something that is trustworthy, that is something that we can look to as a possible leader, that will help them move forward and help the country move in the right direction. So that was kind of probably a non-committal answer, but that's
it was very lawyerly of you. Yes.
It was what?
Very lawyerly of you.
Oh, thank you.
But one of the things that I think is a point well taken. Whoops. Are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I moved my mouse on accident and I lost you. I think one of the things that's a point well taken is the idea of the small conversations having to take place, because you're right. Facebook is like just some guy standing on the street corner screaming at whoever's gonna walk by, and so you see kind of the just the vitriol spewing out sometimes on Facebook. But if something that even in that vitriol, if something is said that spurs somebody else or two people to get together and actually have a conversation about whatever the problem is, I think that's valuable. And I think that I don't see a lot of substance going on when people are talking at the debates or are doing stump speeches at rallies. I mean, it tends to be the same thing over and over and over again, and war chants, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But if those debates do inspire somebody to leave the debate and go home and sit down and have an intelligent conversation about an issue with their neighbor or with their family, then I think that's important. And I think, to me, I want somebody who can try to who can lead us down the path of discussion and who can lead us down an intelligent path of discourse. And I don't know that everybody in the race right now can do that, but I think that I have some hope that at least a couple of them can, and hopefully will someday.
Someday, right? Yeah. We'll all see what happens.
The day before election day, as I can guess it. So
yeah, perfect. All right, so I got one more for you.
All right.
Last one for me.
Oh.
So you have done a lot of different things, and you've worked for a lot of different leaders, I'm sure, over the years, and whether it's at amusement parks or in the legal field. And I'm just wondering, what sort of things have you learned in your experience that could help either someone coming into, coming up as a lawyer or coming up as a leadership role at a theme park, at an amusement park?
Excellent question, because I see. You're right. I mean, I've worked with people who are professional managers, and I've worked with a lot of lawyers who are very, very smart people, but not all of them are very good managers. So I've kind of seen both ends of the spectrum among very professional people. And to me, the most powerful thing I think I've seen good leaders do is be open about what they don't know. Because I can't tell you how many times I have seen people try to fake it, because they think that because they're in a leadership position, they're a manager or a supervisor or, a partner in a law firm or whatever, that they are supposed to know everything. And so therefore, if something comes up that they don't know, they try to fake their way through it. And not only is it usually pretty transparent, but it sends the message that you don't trust the people who might know, who are around you. And I think that if you're willing to just kind of say, look, I don't know the answer here, so I'm open to suggestions. I think that conveys trust. It conveys that you're all kind of a part of the team, that everybody's going to have input. And at the end of the day, maybe that person, after considering all the information, kind of tosses some of it to the side and says, I'm not going to go that way. But at least you've had a voice then. At least the people who are working with know that they had some input, even if it's not followed. I think that is really important. And I really, it's one thing that's so hard to do, especially I found, and I remember this, from working with young people when I was in management at Worlds of Fun or at Cedar Point. When you're given, when you have a 16 or a 17 or an 18-year-old and they're given their first real leadership position, maybe they're a lead on the ride or something like that. It's really hard sometimes for those people to admit that they just might not know what they're doing when it comes to certain things. Especially at the beginning of the season or the beginning of their job, if they're newly promoted, when they're kind of riding high on that feeling of satisfaction from getting the promotion, to be able to step back and say, I've never really experienced this before, and I don't really know what I'm doing on this particular issue. So I'd love it if somebody could help me out here. I think that's really important.
And so where do you think that comes from? Where do you think the non-transparency comes from, where people think, well, I've got to know everything. I've got to be the expert. Otherwise, what's the consequence? People aren't going to respect me, or what do you think that is?
I think it's part of it is maybe the concern that, they won't respect me if I don't know what I'm doing. But I think part of it also is their unrealistic expectation that everybody thinks that they know what they're doing. And so therefore, if they admit that they don't necessarily, or that they need help, that's somehow a showing that they're not qualified for the job that they've been given. And, as somebody who used to put people in those jobs all the time, and as somebody who's still today, I supervise other attorneys who are working on cases with me. And it does not bother me in the slightest when somebody says, I've never come up across this particular issue, or I've never had this kind of, motion filed, and I don't really know what to do with it. That's what we do. We talk through it and we figure it out. And sometimes I have to call, a great example actually from my world is that my firm employs several people who used to clerk for judges. So they would be sitting with the judge in chambers, and they would write opinions, and they would deal with kind of the day-to-day of a case management from the court's perspective, which is not a perspective that most lawyers see every day. And so the advantage to that is they get to see a lot of stuff that I might not have seen in my own practice, because they deal with a caseload of maybe 100 cases, and I have a dozen or 2 dozen or whatever, and they're not all active at the same time. So it's not at all unusual where something might happen, and I'll pick up the phone and call one of those former clerks and say, in your clerkship, did you ever run across this? Did you ever see this? Because I've got this motion, and I'm not really sure what the best argument here is going to be against it, but any insight on that? And I think there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it takes, especially people who are inexperienced in leadership, it takes some talking, some convincing to get them to realize that it's okay to not know everything. It's really fine. And in fact, it's expected that you're not going to know everything.
And it's interesting when you say it's expected that you're not going to know everything, because other people that have been in leadership roles were in the same spot knowing that they didn't know everything.
Right.
So it's kind of an interesting.
And I've seen it where, people in like full-time management positions, director level positions, have been moved from one area and one department in a park, and have been basically given total control over another area of the park that they have never worked a day in their life in. And of course, nobody expects that person to walk in on the first day and know everything about, something that they've never done before. But I think when you've kind of progressed up the level, up the chain a little bit, up the ladder, it gets easier to admit that you just don't know some things. Where I have seen the predominance of this is with people who are more junior and who really feel like they've got to impress right now. They got to know everything about everything, and they can really, they can make some mistakes if they don't ask for help.
And it's interesting that it takes more experience to be able to say that you don't know as much.
Right? I had not thought of that, but you're right.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it either until you just mentioned it. So.
That is why you're the professional, my friend.
That's why I wrote that down.
Okay, my turn.
Bring it.
Last one. And you know what? This has some similarity to what you just asked me, unfortunately.
It's okay.
This is the downside of not sharing questions ahead of time, apparently. So, as you know, I am very active in the New England Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. And I know that there's a certain New England amusement park that holds a special place for you. You started at Canopy Lake in New Hampshire, correct?
That is 100% correct, yes.
Right. And how old were you when you started there?
18.
18 years old. First theme park job.
Yep.
Okay.
Running the roundup.
Running the roundup. Okay. So what I'm interested to know is you have now, worked with Canopy Lake, you've worked with Cedar Fair organization, you worked at Universal. You're now in, lots of different parks all the time. What has stuck with you since the time you were 18 years old running the Roundup that you still use today when you're doing your work with all these other parks? What has Canopy Lake left with you?
Wow. Canopy is really where I developed my passion for the industry. And I know we've talked about that a lot already, but, working so many hours a day and, 6 days a week and with the same people all the time, you develop really strong bonds, you develop really strong relationships, and you really develop this desire, and maybe it's in there for a lot of people already, but you get to cultivate this desire to serve others. And I think because we get to help other people, I think that's what kind of gets under our skin, and it feels really good to do that. So I think that feeling has really stuck with me, and I my little tagline is helping leaders lead. So I'm all about trying to help people. And, I was just up with a client last week, and I said, you know what, and I say this to most of the clients too, that, if you have a question, call me, email me. There's no charge. I don't care if you send me a smoke signal. My concern is that you get your question answered, not how you ask me, or, is this, to use your world, is this billable time? That stuff doesn't matter to me. It's more about, helping people be able to do their jobs better and to be a better leader and to be a better human being. But also somewhat related to that is that in the parks that I get to go to, that I have been to as a guest, you mentioned my roller coaster trips, and those have really served me well from the standpoint of now, going to visit them as a guest, and then going to work there and consult with their leaders and work with their teams, because not only does it give me a perspective of that particular park, but I also get to take pictures and I can use those in my presentations, and it makes it a lot more personal to the actual park and the presentation. And there's one particular set of pictures that I like to use because they have myself and other people that go on the trip, but specifically this one gentleman, his name is Alan DeGennaro, and Alan was actually my very first boss at Canopy Lake Park. He was the guy doing my schedule. He was the guy giving me my breaks, coming around. He was also the guy that, had to come around and ask people, hey, the park's going to stay open for this school group. Can you stay late today? So he was that guy. And 20-something years later, he and I are still really great friends, and he's one of the guys that I go with on these roller coaster trips. So what that helps me sort of convey to people as I do sort of a quick introduction and talk about how I had a great time in their park, and here's this picture of myself and this really was a really great friend. It really helps me tie back to the fact that this business, and again, probably why this business is gets under people's skin, is because it's all about people. It's all about the relationships that you build, and whether that's a relationship that you have with your teams or the relationships you build with your guests, it's still all about people. And, having those pictures of my first boss at Canopy and I 20-something years later, that's really stuck with me, and that's helped to kind of tell those stories. So I think those are the kind of things that have stuck with me since my early days in the industry.
It's interesting that you said, your story about your first manager is interesting to me, because I will bet you money that 20 some odd years ago, when you were his employee, he probably didn't know that he was creating, somebody who's going to live his professional life in the amusement park industry. You were just, another guy on the crew on the Roundup for him. And I think that it's important that as people are coming up in the industry, that people in leadership positions don't lose sight of the fact that they actually do have an impact on the people that work for them. I see it all the time. And it's the reason why I think, you don't meet very many people who are in leadership positions in the industry who didn't come from the front lines. Almost everybody I know, came up through the industry the way that you and I both did. And the impact that a good lead or a good supervisor can have right out of the gate is something that is probably not thought about too much when it's happening, but I think it's important, and it's kind of I hate to sound too grandiose, but it really is the future of the industry. The people who are running rides at, lake compounds near me or Quasi or Six Flags New England, I mean, those are the people that are going to be running those organizations someday. And do you want that person to quit and not have the opportunity to love the industry as much as you or I or all these other people we know, just because they get a bad leadership experience right out of the gate? And that's why I think, what you do is really important in trying to develop leaders and trying to make sure that people are nurtured and grow to become really capable professionals. And it's something that, as a lawyer, I try, when I'm talking to groups, I try to convey that as well, because I know that even though I'm not running rides today, I'm not the rides manager at Worlds of Fun anymore, or something like that. I know what the park did for me. I know that I am a better person because of, all the work and all the hot, sweaty days at Cedar Point and Worlds of Fun and Universal. And I think it's important that gets passed along to, to the next group of people.
I agree. And I think that when you talk about the future, and I don't think it's too grandiose, I think it's absolutely true that, because so many people get promoted from within, because so many people get the bug, because so many people go try to do other things and come back, like myself. I left the industry twice and came back. Because of that, you have to nurture those folks and, allow them to get the bug, because, it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen, your first shift. It takes time to develop. It takes time to realize that this is kind of fun and I like doing this. And, for me, a big part of it too was about entertainment. I used to love, telling people stupid jokes, like, you talked about on the riverboat. So to me, it was about entertainment. It was about service. It was about helping. It was about just having a good time. And, oh, by the way, I got paid for it at the same time. So,
it's funny. I tried to quit 3 days into my first year. I went to training week, which was the week before the park opened at Cedar Point, and made it about 3 or 4 days in. Park hadn't even opened yet. And I went into my boss's office and I said, this is not for me. I should not be doing this. I was a theater major in college. I was going to go act in a play somewhere. And I said, this is not for me. And she said, well, I'm not letting you quit. And I said, well, I don't know that that's your choice, really. And she said, just do me a favor and give it 2 weeks. She said, give it 2 weeks. If you still want to quit in 2 weeks, you can quit in 2 weeks. But give it 2 weeks. Let the park get open and then come back and talk to me. And I never did go back and talk to her about that, obviously. I ended up, working with her both at Worlds of Fun and at Cedar Point. Flip that, Cedar Point first and then Worlds of Fun, for many years. And I hate to have to admit it, that it's a lot of credit to her for keeping me there. And if she watches this, I'm never going to hear the end of it, I'm sure.
I'm sure she won't. I'm sure you won't. She won't let you forget that.
You did something very good for me. So
there you go. Giving credit where credit's due.
Right.
Awesome. Well, those are my questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to add or ask or before we sign off?
I have pulled all the knowledge from your brain that I wanted to.
Well, I know there's a lot more knowledge in your brain, but we don't have time to get to it. So maybe we'll schedule another call sometime. But Erik, I want to thank you very, very much for taking the time to do this and for thinking up some really great questions. If anybody wants to check out Erik on the Legal Roller Coaster, that's legalrollercoaster.com. You heard it here. He's promised to update some things here in the near future, and looking forward to hearing more of his legal perspectives. So Erik, thank you again, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it.